All right, how y'all doing today? How are we liking it so far? How are we feeling? Yes, nods? Fabulous. All right. So, we're here to talk about what you don't know is hurting you. Do we have any thoughts about what that might be? What might not we know that might be hurting us? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. That might be hurting me. How about you? Yeah. You don't have to raise your hand. Shout it out.
I think insights into how you can, better advance your career or personality traits that may not be conducive to the work environment, just any and everything, right? The things that people won't always tell you. I think that's what I think of.
I love it. Yeah. Go for it.
The last session, they talked about like politics in the office. I think not always knowing or not always knowing how to be aware of what those politics are and or how to navigate them in the workplace.
Yeah. Those can be really difficult. Any other thoughts? Perception.
Oh, that was
It's
it?
almost like you read the book. Okay. We'll talk about it.
I was going to say unspoken rules for how decisions are getting made at the higher levels that you don't have insight into.
That's good. That's good. That's good. We're actually going to talk. Oh, there's more. Go for it.
I'd say similarly, I guess the question of what motivates those in the seats of power. I think they talked about it in the last session, figuring out how to give them also what they want. And so what is that thing so that you can actually deliver on that?
These are all really insightful and I think pretty on point with what we're going to talk about. More. Yes. Give me all of that.
I would say like job stability or like the challenge of getting into a new or emerging sector.
So like what to do when you're looking to pivot.
Yes. Or how to pivot or yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more today in some of the other panels as well. And so I think we'll touch on it definitely now, but we might be able to go a little bit deeper later on today into that specifically as well. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, I mean, this is great primer for what we're going to talk about. I had a whole introduction written, but wow, we've done a great deal of what I was going to say. But actually, I think just as a continued vibe check, I kind of want to just level set and temperature check the room. How many times have you felt like you've been doing all the work and doing all the things you think are the right things, but it doesn't really seem to be converting? It doesn't really seem to be making you any progress or any headway, or like, why am I not seeing the result of what I think is my hard work? That was like almost everybody, definitely me as well. And so what we want to do in this conversation is to explore some of the things that may not be as obvious, right? Some of the hidden things, what we were talking about before, the perception, the politics, some of what our managers and mentors might be thinking about that we don't. Having some of that discussion and uncovering that together so that we can walk out of the room a little bit more equipped and a little bit more informed to be able to do or be or say some of those things. Does that feel fair? Now, there's a framework for this that we're using that this session is named after. There's a book by Marion Brooks that we actually highly recommend that you take a look at. And in that book, he gives us a framework, 4 Ps. We heard 5 Ps from Rachel yesterday, but these are different 4 Ps today. 4 Ps that he suggests are 4 things that we may not be paying attention to that are some hidden spots that might be some of our, what he calls self-sabotage in our careers. So I'll walk through some of that as a framework, but I don't necessarily think that we should take that as gospel, right? Let's challenge some of that. Let's add to that and have a rich discussion about what else there might be that we might want to look at. Fair? So first area that he suggests is a hidden blind spot is performance. And in the book, he talks about it not being enough to just do the job. Consistent high performance is really essential for recognition and advancement. The second P he suggests is positioning. And I know this one is always really interesting and maybe a little awkward for us to do too. It can be really, I call it gratuitous self-promotion. It's really hard to do that job well and not feel inauthentic when we do it. So how do we do it well? And he says, strategic self-promotion and ensuring that your contributions are visible to decision makers is vital for career growth. Third P, someone said this in the room, perception. And he says, cultivating a positive professional image and managing how others perceive you can significantly impact your trajectory. And this is often called your personal brand or your storytelling as a part of that. And then the fourth P is persistence. It talks about determination, resilience, and a relentless pursuit of your goals is essential for overcoming any obstacles that you may face, that you will face in your career, and achieving long-term success. And so I have the distinct pleasure of sitting with two people who I think are super qualified to talk about this, Anwar and Kasandra. So before we get started, I like to do a few rapid-fire questions. Are you okay if we do some rapid-fire questions? Yes? You don't have a choice.
Let's go.
Okay. Rapid fire means you have to answer quickly.
Okay.
So no soliloquies. Okay? All right. What are you watching right now on YouTube?
I am watching a little bit. She didn't know soliloquies. A little bit of a
soliloquy?
A little bit of a nerd, but I'm watching Neil deGrasse Star Talk.
Oh, I love him. He's great.
Yeah.
He's awesome. Cassandra?
There's a series, and I'm forgetting the name of it. There's like 6 black females who are actually who are out of Atlanta, and they try to not laugh while all of them tell jokes.
Oh, I know
And
exactly.
they snap.
Yes. Yes, I love that one. Okay, what are you reading right now, or what is your favorite book?
So my favorite book right now, I would say, is James Clear. It's Atomic Habits.
Mm-hmm.
I just started Tomorrow, and Tomorrow.
Are these 3 separate books?
Did you start?
No, it's just it's just one book.
Okay.
Yeah.
You started yesterday or tomorrow?
What do you do when you're not working?
So I run Ironman triathlons.
Very
So
casual.
it just
Great.
it helps to keep the juices flowing in the brain.
Yeah, I sit on the couch, so.
I'd say yoga. I do that a few times a week. And then I always try to do projects at my house. I'm always doing another project. Yeah, it's a problem because that costs money. So I spend a lot of money on my house, but.
Okay. I'm so glad this fourth question, I realize it might be a little bit of a curveball, but I'm so glad that Gail King mentioned this in the last session. How do you deal with negative feedback?
For me, I try to remove the word negative from it because feedback is feedback. Negative is what you subscribe to it. So I try to listen and take it in and try it on. So that's how I look at feedback.
If you're a Googler, you probably have heard this feedback is a gift constantly. It's true. I will say it really depends on who's delivering the feedback and where I am at that moment. My manager can literally tell me anything, and I'm just like, okay, cool. There are other individuals who it may not be as easy to take that information, and so if they say, hey, I have something I want to share with you, if I'm not in the mood, I'll say like, hey, can we do this tomorrow? It really depends on where you're at, because if you get feedback in a moment where you're not mentally ready to receive it, your response could actually be damaging. So.
I'll share a personal story. I had transitioned roles within Google during the pandemic, and I had like 4 managers in the span of a very short period of time. And so I was getting feedback, 360 feedback also, which did not feel great. And got on the call, and I have 2 managers on the call at the same time. And yeah, I heard it was in the room. And they were delivering this feedback that, 1, I didn't agree with, and 2, I felt very blindsided, and it was just not great. And I remember Google is very camera on, very like, let's see your face. So I hit that camera off, and I said, okay. I just muted myself. I was like, this is really weird. But there have been times I haven't handled negative feedback well. But we'll talk a little bit about that today, too.
I was going to add on that note, if you're in a virtual environment, your internet can kick out.
Hello.
Like, it's a thing.
Plug it out.
If you truly need that space, and I've witnessed people in very senior positions do that.
Yeah.
So it is okay.
Oh, no, there's a really bad storm. Okay, final question. This is like not so rapid fire, but do you have a word for the year? We're still in January. We're still setting intentions. If you have a word for the year, what is it? And if you don't, that's okay. But what is your word for the year?
I do have a word for the year. As a matter of fact, I need to talk to Kasandra. So it's refresh. That's like I try to go into the year thinking about like what's my theme for the year, and this year is like refresh. And by refresh, I mean like take the old and make it new, like refresh some things. And I said I need to talk to Kasandra because my house is one of those things, right? I got those projects that you haven't done in like 15, 20 years. So we've had the same furniture for like, I don't know, 15, 20 years, same carpet. So I'm like, this is the year to refresh. We're going to change the carpet. We're going to change the furniture. We're going to change the look. So, reinventing and refresh is really for me, like sometimes you just got to pull back and say, it's time to just refresh everything. So.
I was going to say belonging, and the reason I say that, given a lot of the things that are happening in our current political environment, it's something I'm now having to adapt to instead of using the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion bundled together. And you'll probably continue to hear that change start to occur in a lot of companies. Is we're starting to use belonging constantly, so adapting to that is definitely something new.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing those. Hopefully that gives us a better sense of our panelists today, and hopefully you're liking it so far. We started off with exploring, or just kind of talking through very briefly, the 4 Ps that the author mentions in his book. And so what I'd like to do is just explore those Ps one at a time and have some discussion around them.
Yeah.
So let's start with performance. And I have some questions for y'all. Kasandra, can you talk to me? Your word you mentioned is, you talked about doing yoga, and that's how you stay centered and focused. And so I kind of want to ask a question related to that, which is how do you stay motivated and maintain high performance, whatever that might mean for you, even when you're faced with sometimes mundane or routine things or extraneous challenging things? How do you maintain high performance in those situations?
Things that are monotonous in nature, I'm always like, get them done in as short of a time as you possibly can get them done. So the best thing is just to create a routine for it. And I'm a very routine-oriented, very type A for the most part type of person. If you check my calendar right now, it says I went to the gym this morning, said that I meditated right before that, told you when I got into the shower. Like, it's all very well documented. But I find really just setting time to do the things that are more monotonous and getting them out of the way is really useful. And if you are the type of person who needs to check the thing that you think is monotonous, set time to do it in advance and then go back and recheck that. In terms of addressing things that are more complex and getting those things kind of accomplished, ask questions. It's always okay to ask questions. Give yourself the space to understand what you're actually trying to solve. And given that yesterday they went through some of the AI content that Google's currently developing, I love Gemini. I am constantly on Gemini, like, I'm thinking about this thing. Here's the direction I'd like to go. Tell me why it won't work. Or does this make sense to you? So learning how to also leverage tools that are simplifying my need to go and have a meeting with a bunch of teammates or spend an hour on a call with a peer to brainstorm. I'm now leveraging artificial intelligence to reduce the time that's going out. So it definitely helps kind of maintain a high level of performance because I'm reducing that time used.
Can I add 30 seconds to that?
Please.
Maybe it might be 45 seconds, but
Sure.
Because you made some excellent points. One of the things is, like, I had a mentor tell me a long, long time ago. He said when you get too big to do the little things, you get too little to do the big things. And so
hold on.
I think,
one more time for your mind, please.
Yeah, when you get too big to do the little things, you get too little to do the big things. And I think a lot of times, because when we think about mundane tasks, we don't see the bigger picture, right? And then we think that we're too important or too big to do those things. And so I keep that in the back of my mind with every single thing. And specifically, like in an entrepreneur environment, you got to do everything. You might have to go carry the paper, carry the chairs, and make the boardroom decisions, that kind of thing. So it's very relevant for me. And the other thing, that kind of keeps me focused is, not losing the big picture, right? A story somebody told me, like, you have 2 bricklayers, right? 2 masons, and one of them is, you ask him what he did. He says, "Oh, I'm a bricklayer," and he hates his job, hates what he's doing, da 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 da. The other person, you ask him what he's doing, he says, "I'm building a cathedral," And so his perception of what he's doing, looking at the bigger picture, has him enjoy every moment, even the little things. And so I try to keep in mind what is the big picture that I'm going for, and then all the pieces that you need to do in order to get there, instead of like running away from the little things like I'm too big, I'm too little, I'm too important to do these mundane tasks kind of thing.
I think that's really, really insightful. And what I'm curious about, what you just mentioned, Anwar, is this evolution over time, being small at one time and then being big, and then the things around you changing with that evolution. Yeah. And so I'm curious how high performance has also evolved over time, from when you started your career to now. How has high performance changed, and how have you responded to that change?
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, just coming to Google, I used to think that I thought big until I came to Google, I was, trying to do some big things in my life, and it came to Google. And I remember one of the first meetings I ever had, it was on onboarding, and Google was saying that when they decided to do maps, they were like, well, we're not mapping a city or a street or a state or a country. We want to map the entire world. And we call it, really moonshot projects, right? So if you shoot for the moon and you fall short of the moon, you'll at least hit the rooftops, right? So it's starting with that high goal. So I think for performance for me is that I tried to expand my vision of what performance is. I think in the beginning of my career, my performance was about trying to perform up to someone else's expectations. And that's very, very limiting, right? Because people will put a limit on you, and they will box you in on how they see you. And so I think as I progressed in my career and my thinking, I began to unlock those limits and have goals that was well beyond what the expectations was, so that when you perform up to goals that you have for yourself. Now, you don't share them, so if they like your goal is to hit X metrics, you don't be like, I'm going to hit 10X. You might in your head think 10X, because then all of a sudden they'll raise the expectation and you'll get a B rating instead of like an A+ outstanding rating. But nonetheless, so for me, it was about trying to make sure that my expectations was bigger and broader than other people's expectations, having bigger expectations of myself than anyone would ever have. In fact, I think that's what Michael Jordan said. He said his expectation, he set higher expectations of himself than any human being can possibly expect, which is why when the coach was like, it's okay to show up at 8 o'clock, that's what time practice start. The real high performers, they show up at 5 a.m. when nobody else is there, or 6 a.m. Kobe Bryant, same exact thing. So it's important to be able to set expectations higher than what other people are setting on you, and that drives your performance. And we'll get to this in a second, but the other thing is your performance also doesn't speak to itself, speaks for itself, which goes to another principle that we'll talk about a little bit later.
I guess to add to that, when I started looking at actually having a career versus just doing jobs, and when I just had a job, it was I did the thing to get the money to maybe match the metrics that got me whatever goal that I was trying to accomplish in that moment. It wasn't very strategic. It was very much based in, I'm going to do this because I want this, and I'm probably not going to work here in 2 years, and I'll move on. Now that I'm in a career space, I do think more strategically. It's who am I trying to build relationships with, and then ultimately getting to what Anwar already just mentioned, which is what are the really high goals that can be set. And I'd add an additional piece. What realistically can I do, but what can I maybe push myself to do a little further? Because I may not get to that 10X, but I might get 70% of that 10X, and I could have only had the tools originally to do the 5X. So.
I actually just want to underscore a little bit of that. You're hearing us mention moonshot and 10X, and those are words that we use at Google all the time. I chuckled a little bit on the side when you mentioned not sharing the 10X goal. I work in sales, and so we talk 10X goals all the time, and they are very explicit. But I think what is also really unique and that I love about working here is that we also create failure labs, where if you don't hit that 10X, it's not personal failure or personal indictment. And we can learn from something that we did not hit. We didn't hit the 10X, we got 80, or we got 70, or we got 60. What do we want to learn and do differently next time so we can iterate and actually hit that 10X and get to the moon and then get somewhere else? I've seen us blow through goals that I thought were audacious before and like books of business double and triple that I didn't see possible at any time prior. And I think that has only happened by setting really audacious goals and also being explicit and transparent about them in a radical way so that we can hold ourselves accountable together and then figure out what we need to do differently to learn and iterate next time. So you hear some language from us. Anytime you'll hear Googlese or I had like a whole, when I first joined here, I had a whole appendix in the back of my notes. Like, what are y'all talking about? So anytime you'll hear some things that are native to us here at Google, I'll try my best to explain. Let's actually go a little bit. I think what you were alluding to before is positioning. So your performance doesn't speak for itself. So let's transition there a little bit. I am curious, personally, I think I've always sort of struggled with this. How do you showcase effectively achievements and accomplishments and 10x, all of that stuff, without appearing boastful or self-serving, or how do you get that done? Is there a way to balance that, or is there no balance?
I definitely think so. I mean, one, culturally, you got to understand. I think it starts with your belief about what it means to self-promote a little bit. Culturally, from my culture, the whole thing was, again, accomplishments will speak for themselves. You don't have to, boast or brag or anything like that, so-called boasting or bragging. And then we all been around people who, like, brag about everything and they irritate you. You're like, oh my God, whatever you say, they one up it. I went to the beach. I went to, Cancun. Like, okay, I didn't ask you, right? So, so that perception is in the back of your mind, like it's a bad thing to boast. And then even from a spiritual perspective, and I was raised Muslim, then converted to Christian. Not that it matters, but is always like stay humble. Like you committing this grave sin if you speak about your accomplishments. But so I had to have a mindset shift around it because I realized that people around me who actually was able to share their accomplishments, those were the ones who were promoted above me. Those are the ones that progressed in their career. So here I'm quiet and silent and nobody know what I'm doing. I may be doing some great things, but if nobody knows it, then what happens? The whole saying is if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it really fall? Of course it does, but nobody hears it. So what does it mean? It has no impact. And so if you're not sharing your accomplishments, that means that you're not letting the world know just how great you are. So I had to make a mindset shift to say my company can actually leverage my talents if they know that I'm talented in a specific area. But if they don't know, then I'm doing them a disservice by not sharing with them the incredible things that I could be doing that they could be leveraging and taking to the next level. So it had to go from thinking about it as being an ego thing to being a selfish thing. It's actually selfish if you don't share your accomplishments because you're not providing the opportunity for other people to leverage your greatest strengths because they don't know what they are. And then even more than that is that your accomplishments may actually shine a light for someone else to inspire them to do great things. And so by you not sharing it, it is holding you in a selfish light where you're not providing an opportunity for other people to learn and grow from you. So it starts with the mindset shift that it's not an egotistic thing. It's actually a selfish thing if I don't flip it and other people need me to share what I'm doing, right? So that's the first piece. So you can be in a clearing about it and have a good spirit about it. Then the second piece in terms of the how-to that I would mention, I think it's about focusing on the impact of what you do, right? And so it's not so much about I did this and I did that. It's about, let me share with you the impact. Because in everything we're doing, we're serving somebody, right? In sales, we're serving our customers, right? Or we're serving the goals of the company. If we're doing work in the community, we're serving the community. If we're doing work, we're serving students, right? And so it's important when you share the impact that you had on others, you're sharing what you're doing, but the focus is not on you as the centerpiece. You're simply the catalyst for the work that's causing the impact. So think about the other person and the other institutions and other things that you're impacting and share that. And then it's okay to actually share updates, whether it's a weekly thing, whether it's a quarterly thing to the people that matter, to your management. Some people put out impact reports. Have a personal impact report. I want to kind of let you know what I'm working on this quarter. So I can see where you may be able to help in. If you can do everything on your own, what you're doing is not big enough. You should be able to, if you need some help from other people to work on really big things. And so it's important to share the things that you're doing And you can, again, preference with hey, I could use some help, I could use some support, or think about how you might be able to support me in this next time. So impact reports is a big thing. Changing mentality is another thing I think I would add.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, you touched on the part of kind of what can you do to maybe help someone else. And when people feel as though they are part of you accomplishing something, they are that much more likely to help you get to that next step. Because we all, unfortunately, are intrinsically a bit selfish and want to say, hey, we definitely did this thing. Now, we may not go brag about it, but we may say, okay, I did this thing that got this person to there, and I'm really happy about it. So just be really mindful of the fact that leveraging individuals to kind of help you grow is definitely an approach. The other part I would say is I think we also get really caught up in just showing what we're doing and being braggadocious about that. Maybe don't lead with that. Lead with building a legitimate relationship with someone that maybe isn't based purely in what you do for work. And once they're bought into you as a person, the conversations that are then necessary to help you get to the next step become that much easier, because they're like, oh, well, I like you as a person, so I do want to see you succeed. So when you're saying, hey, I accomplished this, but I want to keep going, they're going to help you. It's hand in hand.
I think that pairs really well with some of what Larry opened with today, which is thinking about authenticity. I think a part of what feels deeply inauthentic about self-promotion is that you feel like you're not showing up as yourself, but your accomplishments. And I do think that much of our transparency and what we share is not just what we do, but also who we are. So I'm a good people person. I'm a good motivator. I'm a good something else that isn't just a line that I can put on my resume or my OKRs. Who am I and how do I show up in what I do? And that being a difference maker in whatever it is that you're showing up with, not feeling as inauthentic in how you do that. One challenge, though, I do think, and I've struggled with this myself, so I'm bringing my personal problems to the table for you to solve. How do you strike the balance between focusing on actually just getting things done? Because guess what? You got to get things done. How do you strike that balance between having enough time and focus and energy on getting things done and also doing what is work of being visible and being in front of and sending those impact reports? How do you manage that time and effort and energy?
My paycheck says that I get paid to work 80 hours every 2 weeks. So I try my best to keep within that.
You have to tell us your secret.
Well, I think part of it is just that mentality. It's understanding that majority of folks, even if you are salaried, your paycheck does pay you per hour. And understand that you are being paid that, so do as much as you can during that time period. I was actually at a summit last year, and one executive was saying he couldn't get to senior director, and he was boggled, and he was working 55 hours a week. He said the moment he said, all I have is 40 to give you, things started shifting, because he was saying, I can't take that meeting. That meeting's going to put me over, or I actually can't take an additional project. It doesn't make sense. We need to accomplish the one we have now before we transition to something else. And start asking, what are we going to deprioritize in order to get me to the next space? I think the big thing is just holding your space and respecting the time you have. You do have to say no to things. You may have to say yes to things because they may help you get something done faster. But being really clear with, I have X amount of time to get something done. How am I most effectively going to utilize that time?
Can I ask a question based on that? Saying no is hard. And saying no can feel like it comes at a cost, often of your perception, the third point. How do I say no? How do I manage my perception and my boundaries at the same time as I look to progress my career?
I'm a program manager by trade. I often will ask my boss if I don't think I can get something done immediately, when do you need this done by? When do you need this thing accomplished by? When are you hoping to roll this thing out? And I level set. She asked me to get a project done actually by the end of February, and I said, realistically, because we're still onboarding a vendor we need to work with, I think we're gonna do end of Q1. And she's like, no, that's reasonable as long as it's Q1. I didn't say no. I just had the dialogue to set realistic expectations. So now I have some bandwidth, an additional 4 weeks to get something done. I'd just say have follow-up questions. It doesn't need to be a no out the gate.
Anything from you, Anwar?
That it's okay to have struggles, and that's one of my struggles too. But to Cassandra's point, I don't struggle. I used to, just like I work the weekends, and I got a computer, and I've been working from home since 2005, so it's been 20 years now for me. And so you have these fuzzy boundaries between work and personal life when you work from home sometimes, right? And I was on the latter part. My wife would come in at 8:30, was like, "You can stop working now at 8:30 p.m. Just in time for bed." But now it's like I'm like you. I'm like, look, it ain't getting done today. Punt. You know what I mean? That's my favorite word. If you ask any of my kids and my wife, punt. If you can't get it done, punt. Punt to the next day. Punt to another time. You got to punt some things off your task list. So I'm the person that says yes to a lot of things and then can't get all the things done. So I struggle with that a little bit. But I also do what you said, which is you communicate in advance. Where it becomes a problem is where the deadline is at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock hit and you won't have it. So it's really important to be able to advance out and say, look, see the future and say, hey, listen, I'm not going to be able to get this done. So I concur with that, but that is one of the things that I continue to struggle with, doing too much and needing to say no to some things.
One thing I wanted to add, I'm sure people have heard you, what is it? You don't want to work to live.
Live to work.
Yeah, live to work, work to live, that. Just be really mindful of the fact that your job is supposed to allow you to live a life. It's not supposed to be your entire life. And settling yourself and reinforcing that with yourself may help do that transition of mindset. I was the person. I actually started out of Atlanta as a contractor, and I was working at times 70 hours a week. I do not do that anymore. I'm also older, so I don't have as much energy, but I definitely do not do that anymore.
I think it's a
So
real...
saying one thing,
Go.
I'm sorry. Because you wanted to, going back to positioning for a minute, and I wanted to be honest about this as well. The other thing is, again, how do you take the time out from working so much when you do work within those hours to make sure that you are sharing your accomplishments, which is something I struggle with as well. But the other side of that, the flip side of that, is if you're working so much that you don't have time to share your accomplishments, you're also working so much that you don't have time to appreciate other people for the accomplishments of how they contribute to you. So I realize that struggle goes both ways. So I actually have something in my calendar now that says like G thanks, and we know what this is. It gives me a time to reflect on and submit G thanks or think about who should have my J thanks. So I schedule it in because normally left to my own devices, I would miss right past it, sharing my accomplishments and thanking other people for their accomplishments. So I literally have to put it on my calendar to pause and say, who do I need to think about this quarter or this month that I can G thank? So I just wanted to add that.
Which creates a really great culture of appreciation and acknowledgement that is more authentic and natural, right? So when someone gives you a G thanks, you don't necessarily feel obligated to give them back, but you sort of pay attention to what they're working on. You pay attention to what they're doing. You think about how you collaborated with them in a certain kind of way. So that culture of appreciation and building that in actually pays dividends in helping for you to have your own self or work be seen in an interesting way.
If you're not a Google employee, G thanks refers to our ability to send thank yous to people. We also have peer bonuses that are an option as well. Peer bonuses, we get up to 5 every quarter. It's $175 you can send to someone and say, hey, I think you went out of your way to accomplish X. Thank you.
Yeah.
But this actually ties back to positioning because I keep an internal resume, and every time I get anything in that system, I put the last 10 that I got, and that goes on my internal resume.
Yep.
Because who you're getting those from can mean a lot when you're going up for promotion.
Absolutely.
If you got one from a VP recently, that could be the thing that gets you right over the hump.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's go through getting over the hump and go to our fourth one, persistence. Oh, the heavy side crosser. How do you maintain focus and motivation in the face of rejection or slow progress? How do you get up the next day and say, we're going to do this again?
I'll take a quick crack at that. Now, I'm a salesman by being, I guess, right?
Okay.
So a no to me means I haven't shared the right thing to have you say yes. Which my wife, about 10 years into our relationship, realized that she can't give me a problem because I'm automatically trying to solve a problem. Like, hey, let's go to California. We can't because we have this weekend. Oh, well, if we do this way, we can do it that way. We can't because we don't have the money. Well, if we pull it from here. So whatever objection you give me, I'm trying to overcome it.
You can come to my team. That'd be great.
So yeah, look, I'm salesman is in my blood. But my wife has learned to say, I just don't want to go. Period. Like she can't give any reason because I don't want to go. As soon as she come because, I'm solving the because, right? So I say that to say that it's instinctive for me, and I guess this is not really helping, but it's instinctive for me to overcome challenges. I see challenges as opportunities. And I think you got to see it that way as a person as well, because if you think about it, every major company came from a problem, right? I mean, even you think about COVID. While COVID was one of the most horrific things that happened in the world. However, what entrepreneurs saw was, okay, now that we can't communicate in person, let's, now streamline digital communication. Let's, now do delivery and Grubhub and all these things. And none of these things have gone away now, right? So anytime there's a problem, entrepreneurs or business owners and people who are high-level thinkers, they think about, this is an opportunity for me to overcome stuff. If everything was easy, then there's no opportunity. Opportunity means challenges. So we should run towards challenges because it means there's an opportunity to grow, to expand, or to come up with a solution that can be transformational. So I think is again, to change the perception of what a challenge is. And then when you keep hitting your head against something, obviously you can have frustration. You know what? Give yourself a break. We take ourselves too seriously. Take a step back from it. You can never see the picture from inside the frame, right? So sometimes you need to pull other people in from outside the frame to help you work on a challenge. A lot of times as people, what we do is we come up with a challenge and we try to persist on our own and we bang our head against the wall. But the real solution is, look, bring in some other people so they can help give you a different perspective and shed a new light on what the challenge is. So that's one of my recommendations when you overcome a challenge. Step back from it, give it a day, give it some time, and bring some other people in to take a look at it.
There's a piece of advice that one of the panelists gave yesterday that I thought was so profound. And she said, motivation changes, determination doesn't. And I was like, yeah, motivation may not be every day. Not every day I'm going to feel like getting up and getting after it. But what is my why? Starting with the why. There's a book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. And once I'm clear on that, whether my feeling changes, which it will, if my determination and my reason for being there, my reason for doing it is clear, then I can push through discomfort, whatever that may be. Okay. So we have these 4. But I want to lob up, just because I'm a little spicy that way. Do you agree that these are the 4? And are there any others you would add or things that you would take away from the 4 the author has suggested?
That's a great question. And, this one I learned later in my career. And they integrated in the 4, but I want to make it really crystal clear. And the 4th one is a P word also, except for the P is the second letter instead of first, but it's sponsorship, right? I realized that
That's funny.
if people are not talking to you, if people are not talking about you when you are not present, and people with wherewithal and power and influence are not saying your names in the room where it matters, then you're not going to progress in your career. And sponsorship is very different than mentorship. Right? Where mentorship is someone is giving you some insight, some valuable insight, but they can't necessarily move the needle on your career. And I realized that a lot of people who are very, very highly successful, we call it politics, and we run away from it, and we see politics as a bad word. They call it networking, right? And so it's about, a lot of times it really comes back down to who do you know and how are they talking about you and promoting you in a way that you can't promote yourself. And 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10, it is not your manager that is the sponsor. They don't have enough power. It's several layers up that really has the power to probably talk about you. So sponsorship, I think it could be a blind spot. You might be doing all the right things and wondering why you're not getting promoted, wondering why you're not progressing, having conversations with your manager about expectations. But it's because someone is not talking about you when you're not there, that's promoting you to someone else that can make decisions for you and for your career.
I'll echo that real quick. I've had the privilege of being promoted twice at Google, and both times that I've been promoted, it has been somebody else in the room, not my manager, who has been like, no, we've got to promote her. which I thought was a little bit weird, actually, because I was like, are you doing your job? But it was also just speaks to the power of that sponsorship at different layers. Like, other people have to advocate for you, cannot just be your manager.
I mean, sponsorship really also requires the individual who's sponsoring you needs currency. If they are in a room and they don't have the credibility, it does not matter. They can say what they're going to say and someone else will say something else. And because they have the currency, and it may be respect, it may be the level or the seniority that they have. If they do not have that, they are not going to be as impactful. The other part is it works two ways. If someone is your sponsor, there has to be a benefit for them. We often get caught up in the fact that it's about us all the time. And I mentioned earlier, we are inherently a bit selfish. We have to be bringing something to that sponsor as well. Is there a way that they can walk away from this relationship and have an upside? I agree, though, sponsorship is something that is covertly mentioned throughout the book, but isn't as explicit, and definitely something that needs to be top of mind as you're trying to navigate your career.
Hey, last question, and I think we have time for questions. I'm looking at Robert in the back. Yes? Okay. Most valuable thing related to the 4 Ps. So we've challenged them, we've added some. Most valuable thing related to the 4 Ps that you've learned in your career.
I don't know if it's even I've learned in my career so much as I realized that the big change for me was when I got better self-awareness. And this is talked about at length in the book. But I actually, as like reading even the few chapters, I was like, oh, so that was when my therapist said I don't need to meet with them as frequently anymore. And that's
Shout
when
out to
things
the
actually
therapist.
started to
Yes.
change for me professionally. So it's like self-awareness, having self-awareness, knowing how you're showing up in a space. You may not always get it right, but generally speaking, know how you're showing up in a space, being aware of how you might inflect in one way or another. Or maybe you make a face that you think no one else is picking up on, but they know when you're upset. That self-awareness is really critical in helping you navigate to that next step.
Yeah. I would say for me, and it's more around the word perception, and it's probably a little bit different, right? So I was actually raised in the inner city of Philadelphia, and really, really some the what you would consider the terrible neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and I found myself in the tech world. And walking in the tech world, I found myself oftentimes being the only black man in a room of 1,000 people, especially in sales. Like I was in sales and 1,000 people, mostly white men and some white women. Didn't see too many other nationalities, but and then definitely ethnicities. And then here's this black man. So for me, I always felt a little isolated and left out. Like the conversations that I would have, the things that was interesting me was different. What they talked about was just different. I couldn't even relate to some of the stuff. And so I kind of, pulled back a little bit from trying to put myself in the limelight because I didn't want more attention to be drawn to me that was already on me because I'm the only black man in the room, right? So certainly I'm not going to, make myself known. And that was a mistake. And one of the things that, we talk about at Google, another Google term, which I just absolutely love, they talk about, can you fit into the culture, like culture fit. And at Google, we look at cultural add. And it means that you don't fit into the existing framework of the culture, but you add something to the culture. You make it better versus just conforming to the culture. And I realized that I actually add a perspective that nobody else in that room could. I come from a different point of view and a different focus and a different set of experience that can actually add and contribute in a huge way and hit blind spots they didn't know existed. And so instead of trying to shrink back from the limelight, I realized that I had a lot to contribute. So that's why I said perception. It was important how, I'm being perceived, but it's also being authentic in yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Be who you are. Add to the culture and not just fit in the culture. But that was one of the most challenging ones for me specifically about perception.
Well, thank you for sharing. I don't know how much time we have for questions. 5 minutes. Okay, great. We have 5 minutes for questions. Any questions for the panel? Oh, yes. Come on, let's get it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? We'll hit it?
Yes, I wanted to say that what you spoke to about sponsorship really resonated with me. My name is Julie Workler. I work in corporate innovation. Started my career off in consulting, but just took a role. This is my 3rd year working now.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just started working recently inside of a corporation. And so for me, I'm kind of starting to come to terms with how the decisions are getting made, how the sausage is getting made behind the scenes that you don't have as much visibility into. And so on the topic of sponsorship, my question is really around how do you find those people who are willing to invest in you? What are the signals that you see that that person is willing to go the distance with you? And when you come against an obstacle, maybe you don't get the promotion or you don't get that sponsorship that you're looking for, how do you know if that door is open or if it's closed?
I'll give you a few answers, and I'll tell you from my personal career, and I think this is valuable advice for anybody, right? There's what I did in my role, but then there was what I did outside of my role, right? And what I did outside of my role, I was in sales. I was an enterprise seller, strategic enterprise seller for large enterprise accounts in the Northeast. And I volunteered my time to a program that was designed to help support underrepresented minority organizations and companies. And I was just volunteering. And because of the work that I did there, it started giving me high-level visibility, very high. And then before you know it, they promoted me into being the head of Google Cloud's external equity programs globally, right? So what was something I was doing as a volunteer on the side turned into a whole role and position, that I took on. So to answer the question, there's a couple things. One is that you got to make sure you're visible outside of just your job, because that can actually have more impact on how people perceive you and who wants to sponsor you than your actual role. And I wouldn't have had access to these high-level executives had I not volunteered over here just doing something just because it was my passion. That's one. Two, you ask. It's really being strategic. You know who have power. Every one of us, we know who has the power in organizations, who's really calling the shots, and who has influence. You strategically do things that's important to them. If they have a certain pet project they're working on, look, you can volunteer for it. Start working closely with them, and then you can ask them, hey, listen, I'd love for you to, mentor me, give me some tips. You can call it mentorship, but it's sponsorship because of who they are and the power that they have. So you would ask, and through those conversations, those regular touch points that you have with them, and don't make it an overall, like, I need you to meet with me weekly or twice a week. Like, do you mind if once a quarter we put a meeting on the calendar just to kind of check in with you? I'd love to be able to kind of get your feedback on some things that I'm working on and where can I improve. And it's always give them a little fuzz. Hey, listen, it's incredible what you do, what you bring to the company, present you. Give them some sweetener, right? I love if I can kind of learn from you, right? And then go and set up a quarterly meeting. And through those regular touch points, you will understand whether that person is really sponsoring you through the language. You can't always know. The way that I find out is people come back to me, it was like such and such mentioned your name in a meeting. That's how I found out that I was being talked about in rooms that I wasn't in, because they came back and told me. But I think having regular touch points with your sponsor and doing things with them and for them will help build that credibility and that relationship that will have them take on being your sponsor. Did that answer your question? Okay.
I'm doing a quick time check. One more? Okay. Sorry.
I'll try to keep it short.
I saw this one here in the front. I think we can hang out for like 2 minutes after to answer any other questions that we might not have gotten to.
Testing. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Keenan Moore. I just recently graduated from UNC Charlotte. There at UNC Charlotte, I was like a top achiever, really won a lot of awards and stuff like that. And now I'm here in corporate, and it's like, dang, I'm back down at the bottom and stuff like that. So I know definitely for y'all, come to Google, it's somewhere really big. You kind of talked about, you kind of got not challenged, but in a way, you saw there's people thinking a lot more in different ways. And so my question is, hold on, what was my question? Sorry, hold on, wait.
I already know where you're going.
So how can I, you talked about bringing people in to help me out. I became a very big perfectionist in a way. So I became very nervous to people see me failing, because I got so used to achieving so much. Yeah. So it's how do you kind of break the barriers of being so anxious, and being hey, I need help.
Therapy.
I mean,
already do.
That's real. That's real.
Step one, check.
How do you break the barrier? I think it comes back to the note I made on self-awareness, is being extremely aware that, and you already stated, you're aware that that's an issue. And now that you're conscious of that, maybe identifying someone else who's navigated through a very similar situation and leveraging them. We all have a lot more in common than we think we do. It just requires a brief conversation to find out. But be that explicit. Say, hey, I'm dealing with X. And this could be your manager that you go to, it could be someone else you trust. I'm experiencing X. Can you help me, or is there someone else who may be able to help me navigate? And if there is someone else, can you help me with that introduction so I can move on and kind of start making a remedy and hopefully solving? I'll kick to you.
I got to throw something on this one. When I came to Google, right, we call it imposter syndrome, right? I came to Google and I was in this conversation with this engineer. It was me, my manager, the CIO of another company, right, of Amatech, major company, CIO of Amatech, and this engineer that I brought in to answer questions about identity access management, right? Identity access management, what? How do people log onto their computer? To me, it was like, that's simple stuff. A third-party authentication too. They want to like put USB things into the computer. And
Ooh, okay.
So anyway, so I'm in this conversation, and this woman they might as well have been speaking French. I had no idea what they were talking about. And they were going deep. I mean, her and the CIO was going deep. They were talking about theory. I was like, what? I mean, and me and my manager were both sitting there absolutely clueless. We had no idea what they were saying, right? And at that point, imposter syndrome went away. And the reason why it went away from me is because I realized I don't care if I study for 30 years, I will never be able to talk like her. She is an absolute expert at what she does. I can't pretend. I can't measure up. I can't begin to be like her. And I realized, but I have some unique talents and gifts that I bring to the table. And I have to stay in my lane, like you were saying about understanding your self-awareness. I had to stay in my lane and understand, well, there's some things that God gave me that I'm good at, that I'm special at, that I'm unique at, and that I bring to the table. And I don't need to try to be like this person or measure up to someone else. So be comfortable in that skin and try to understand what are you good at from a self-awareness perspective. And then it does take just being vulnerable. Don't try to be all things to all people. Just try to be really good at one thing and then get the right people around you that can fortify you. So I needed to be vulnerable. And I get what you're saying. Especially at Google, you're like, if I bring somebody in, they're going to realize, oh, my God, they shouldn't hire this dude. Who is this guy? And talk about me. You will find that when you're vulnerable, people will be vulnerable with you, and they will open up, and they will want to help you even more. It's when you're pretending that you got it all figured out that they're going to expose you. So that helped me in my thinking, realizing I can't even begin to be like somebody else.
Just a final thought on that. In my first 6 months here, my first mentor said to me, don't expect to know anything for the first 6 months. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why would I not, I'm smart. I should come in here and solve world peace, please. But what she said was the first 6 months, you're going to realize you don't know anything. And in the first year, you're going to realize nobody knows anything either. Everybody is figuring it out just like you. And always figuring it out and always learning something new. And we're just all figuring it out. You may not be there yet. Very soon, you will realize, oh, they actually don't know as much as I thought they did. And that's okay. And I don't know as much as I thought I did, or I don't know about this, and that's also okay. How are we going to learn as a community? That is a very freeing feeling. I did not know I would get there, but when I did, I was like, this feels great. I don't have to be all things to all people or know every single thing that exists.
I got to add 10 seconds on that. I've been in some really high-level meetings that God knows how I got in these meetings. And you get in with these people who run the country and run billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. And all they do on those calls is ask questions of the people who know what they're doing. I'm like, they ask questions and they lay their opinion and they decide to go in a direction. But the top people, they're not on the call speaking. They're on the calls asking the right questions. That's what makes them so good. So to your point, the higher you get, the less they know. They just know how to get the right thing out of the right people to move the ball forward. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I know we are super over time, but I hope this was a good conversation. Was this helpful? Was this insightful? Yes. Well, thank you all so much. I'm excited for the rest of the day. I think we're going to lunch now, yes? Have an amazing lunch. Enjoy.